The honey glowed like liquid gold in the morning sun. And Violet Whitmore knew she'd need to sell every last jar if she wanted to keep the small farm her father had left her when he died 6 months ago in the spring of 1883. She stood behind her wooden cart in the dusty market square of Shoshone, Idaho, watching as people passed by with barely a glance at her wares. The town wasn't large, maybe 500 souls on a good day, and most folks made their own preserves or bought from the bigger suppliers who came through on the railroad. But Violet's honey was different. The bees on her property foraged in wildflower meadows that stretched for miles, untouched and pure, giving the honey a flavor that couldn't be replicated anywhere else in the territory. She adjusted the hand-painted sign that read, "Pure wildflower honey, 25 cents," and wiped her palms on her simple cotton dress. At 22 years old, she'd never imagined she'd be running a farm alone, competing with men twice her age who looked at her with either pity or derision. The bank had already sent 2 letters about the mortgage, and if she couldn't make the payment by the end of August, she'd lose everything. "How much for a taste?" a deep voice asked, pulling her from her worried thoughts. Violet looked up and felt her breath catch slightly. The man standing before her cart was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a worn Stetson. His eyes were a striking shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the Sawtooth Mountains. He wore dusty chaps over his denim pants and a red kerchief around his neck, clearly a working cowboy who'd probably just come in from the range. "It's free to taste, sir," she said, finding her voice. "I want folks to know what they're buying." A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth. He had a strong jaw with a day's worth of stubble, and there was something both rugged and gentle in his expression. "That's mighty confident of you. Must be good honey." "It's the best in Idaho territory," Violet said, meeting his eyes directly. "Maybe the best in the whole West." His smile widened. "Well now, that's quite a claim. I better try it for myself." Violet opened one of the jars and produced a small wooden spoon, dipping it carefully before offering it to him. Their fingers brushed briefly as he took it, and she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. She watched as he brought the spoon to his lips, his expression thoughtful as he tasted the honey. The change in his face was immediate. His eyes widened slightly, and he was silent for a long moment, savoring the taste. When he swallowed, he looked at her with something close to wonder. "That's remarkable," he said quietly. "I've never tasted anything like it. It's sweet, but there's something else. Something like sunshine and meadow flowers all mixed together." Violet felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. Most people just said it was good or nice, but this stranger understood what made her honey special. The bees forage in the wildflower meadows north of town. Nobody else farms that land, so the honey is pure. Each season tastes a little different depending on what's blooming. "You're a beekeeper then?" he asked, genuine interest in his voice. "I am now," Violet admitted. "My father taught me everything before he passed. It was him and me running the farm together for years after my mother died. Now it's just me." Something softened in the cowboy's expression. "I'm sorry for your loss. Can't be easy managing on your own." "It's not," she said honestly, surprising herself with her candor. "There was something about this man that invited trust, but I'm not ready to give up yet." He nodded slowly, respect clear in his eyes. "How many jars do you have?" 12 today. I have more back at the farm, but I can only carry so much in my cart." The cowboy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather purse. "I'll take all 12. Violet blinked. "All of them, sir, that's $3. "I can count," he said with a warm smile. "And it's worth every penny. Besides, I'm thinking the boys back at the ranch would appreciate a taste of something this fine. We've been eating trail food for weeks. You're with a cattle outfit?" Violet asked as she began wrapping the jars carefully in brown paper. "Coleman Ranch, about 15 miles west of here. I'm Cade Vance, foreman. Violet Whitmore. I have a small farm about 3 miles north near Coyote Creek." "The old Whitmore place," Cade said with recognition. "I know it. Pretty piece of land with those rolling hills. You've been there?" Violet asked, securing the wrapped jars in a wooden crate. Rode past it a few times. Always admired the view. Didn't know anyone was keeping bees out there. "Not many people do," Violet admitted. "Father was always more interested in the bees than cattle or crops. Said they were easier to understand than most people." Cade laughed, a rich sound that made Violet smile. He might have been right about that. He handed her $3 silver, his fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary in her palm. "Will you be at the market next week?" "If I have honey to sell," Violet said. "I harvest every 10 days or so during summer. Depends on how the bees are producing." "I'll look for you," Cade said, lifting the crate easily. "Maybe I could come by your farm sometime. I'd be interested to see your operation." "I've always been curious about beekeeping." Violet felt her heart beat a little faster. "I'd welcome the company. Not many visitors make it out my way." "Then I'll make sure to change that," Cade said, his gray-blue eyes holding hers for a long moment. "Take care, Miss Whitmore." "You too, Mr. Vance." She watched him walk away through the market, his tall frame easy to track even in the growing crowd. When he disappeared around the corner toward the livery stable, Violet realized she was smiling. She looked down at the $3 silver in her hand, more money than she'd made in the past 2 weeks combined. The rest of the market day passed slowly. Violet sold a few jars of preserves she'd brought along, and some candles she'd made from beeswax. But her mind kept drifting back to the cowboy with the storm cloud eyes who'd bought all her honey without a second thought. There had been something in the way he'd looked at her, something that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Violet packed up her cart and began the 3-mile journey back to her farm. The old mare pulling the cart, Daisy, knew the way by heart, plodding steadily along the rutted dirt road that wound through sagebrush and scattered pines. The Whitmore farm came into view as they crested a small hill. It wasn't much to look at anymore. The main house needed a fresh coat of paint, and the barn had a few missing boards, but the bee boxes stood in neat rows near the edge of the wildflower meadow, white against the golden grass. This was home, the only home Violet had ever known, and she wasn't ready to lose it. She unhitched Daisy and led her to the small corral, making sure the mare had fresh water and hay before heading into the house. The interior was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the August heat. Violet lit a lamp and set about making herself a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and the last of yesterday's stew. As she ate, she counted the money she'd made. $7.50 total. It was a good day, better than most, but still not nearly enough. The mortgage payment was $50, due in 3 weeks. She had $32 saved, which meant she still needed to earn 18 more. It was possible if she could sell more honey, but the market in Shoshone was small, and she'd already approached the general store about carrying her products. The owner had said he'd think about it, which usually meant no. Violet washed her dishes and sat on the porch as twilight descended. The air cooled quickly once the sun set, and she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She thought about Cade Vance and wondered if he'd really come visit or if it had just been polite conversation. Men said a lot of things they didn't mean, especially to women they'd just met, but something told her Cade was different. There had been sincerity in his voice, genuine interest in his questions. And the way he'd looked at her when she talked about the bees, like he actually cared what she had to say, that wasn't something she encountered often. 3 days later, Violet was checking the hives when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up from the frame she'd been examining, covered in bees, and saw a rider coming up the path from the main road. Even at a distance, she recognized Cade Vance's tall frame and the way he sat his horse, relaxed and confident. Her heart did an unexpected flutter, and she carefully replaced the frame in the hive and closed it up. By the time Cade reached the yard, she'd removed her protective veil and gloves, brushing a few stray bees away gently. "Hope I'm not intruding," Cade called as he dismounted. His horse was a handsome bay gelding with intelligent eyes. "Not at all," Violet said, walking toward him. "I'm just finishing up the afternoon check." "How are they doing?" Cade asked, nodding toward the hives. "Very well. This has been a good summer for them. Plenty of flowers, not too hot, enough rain to keep everything blooming." Cade tied his horse to the fence rail. "The boys at the ranch couldn't stop talking about that honey. I had to hide the last 2 jars in my quarters or they would have eaten them all in a day." Violet laughed. "I'm glad they enjoyed it." "Enjoyed might be an understatement," Cade said with a grin. "Cookie asked me to find out if you sell in bulk. He's thinking about using it in his baking." "Really?" Violet felt a surge of hope. "How much would he want?" "Maybe 20 jars a month. He'd pay fair price." Violet did quick calculations in her head. 20 jars at 25 cents each was $5 a month, $60 a year. It was exactly the kind of steady income she needed. "I can do that. I'd need to increase production a bit, but it's definitely possible." "Good," Cade said. "Cookie will be pleased." He glanced around the property. "Would you mind showing me how the whole operation works? I meant what I said about being curious." "I'd be happy to," Violet said. "Let me show you the hives first." She led him toward the neat rows of white boxes, explaining as they walked. "Each hive is a colony with one queen and thousands of workers. The queen lays eggs, the workers gather nectar and pollen, and they all work together to make honey and raise new bees. It's like a tiny city inside each box." "How many hives do you have?" Cade asked, his attention fully on her. 23 right now. I started with 10 that my father had, and I've been splitting strong colonies to grow the operation. Each hive can produce 60 to 80 pounds of honey in a good season." Cade let out a low whistle. "That's impressive. So you're managing over 1,000 pounds of honey a year, if everything goes well, yes. Though I keep some frames for the bees to eat over winter. They need stores to survive when there's no flowers blooming." "You really care about them," Cade observed, and there was warmth in his voice. "They're remarkable creatures," Violet said softly. "They work so hard and they're so organized. Everything they do has a purpose, and they make something beautiful and sweet from simple flower nectar. There's something almost magical about it." Cade was quiet for a moment, watching her face. "The way you talk about them, I can tell this is more than just farming to you." "It is," Violet admitted. "My father used to say that beekeeping taught him patience and respect. You can't force bees to do anything. You have to work with them, understand them. It made him a better person," he said. Sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Violet felt the familiar ache of loss. "I miss him every day." "How long has it been?" 6 months. "He had a heart attack out in the meadow. By the time I found him, it was too late." Cade's expression was full of sympathy. "That must have been terrible." "It was. But I think he would have liked going that way, out in the sunshine with his bees nearby, better than wasting away in bed." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Cade spoke again. "You mentioned it's just you running the place now. Don't you have any family who could help?" Violet shook her head. My mother died when I was 12. No siblings. Father had a brother somewhere back east, but they lost touch years ago. It's just me. That's a lot of responsibility for one person. It is, Violet agreed. But what choice do I have? This is my home. I won't let the bank take it without a fight. Cade stopped walking and turned to face her. The bank is threatening foreclosure. Violet hesitated. She hadn't meant to reveal that, but something about Cade made her want to be honest. The mortgage payment is due in 3 weeks. I'm close to having enough, but not quite there yet. How much do you need? $18 more. It sounded like such a small amount and yet impossibly large at the same time. Cade reached for his pocket, but Violet held up a hand. Please don't. I appreciate the thought, truly, but I need to earn it myself. I need to prove I can make this work on my own. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I respect that, but if you change your mind, the offer stands. Thank you, Violet said softly. That means more than you know. They continued the tour, Violet showing him the honey house where she extracted and bottled the honey, the workshop where she made candles and soaps from beeswax, and the small vegetable garden she maintained. Cade asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely interested in every detail. You've built something impressive here, he said as they stood on her porch, looking out over the property. Your father would be proud. I hope so, Violet said. Some days I wonder if I'm doing it right, if he would approve of my choices. I think anyone who saw how hard you work and how much you care would approve, Cade said. You're doing something real here, something good. Violet felt warmth spread through her chest. Would you like to stay for supper? It won't be anything fancy, just stew and bread, but you've ridden a long way. Cade's face lit up. I'd like that very much. They went inside, and Violet set about preparing the meal while Cade sat at the wooden kitchen table, telling her about life at the Coleman Ranch. He'd been working there for 5 years, starting as a regular ranch hand and working his way up to foreman. The owner, Gerald Coleman, was getting older and left most of the day-to-day operations to Cade. It's good work, Cade said. Hard but honest. The pay's decent, and Mr. Coleman treats his men fairly. I've seen a lot worse outfits. Were you always a cowboy? Violet asked as she sliced bread. Not always. I grew up on a farm in Missouri. Small place, nothing fancy, but I had itchy feet, wanted to see more of the world. Headed west when I was 18, worked on various ranches from Kansas to California, and ended up here about 5 years ago. Something about Idaho just felt right. Do you miss Missouri? Cade was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. I miss my family, my parents, my 2 younger sisters. But we write letters and I send money when I can. They're doing well. That's good, Violet said, ladling stew into bowls. Family is important. They ate together, the conversation flowing easily. Violet found herself laughing more than she had in months, and the little house felt less lonely with Cade's presence filling it. He told her stories about life on the range, about ornery cattle and beautiful sunrises, about the satisfaction of good work done well. When the meal was finished and the dishes washed, Cade reluctantly said he needed to head back to the ranch. We've got an early start tomorrow, moving cattle to the north pasture. Thank you for coming, Violet said as they stood on the porch. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. It was nice having company. Thank you for having me, Cade said, and for the tour and the meal. I enjoyed every minute. Come back anytime, Violet said, and meant it. Cade looked at her for a long moment, something soft and warm in his eyes. I will, count on it. He stepped closer, and for a moment Violet thought he might kiss her, her breath caught, her heart racing. But instead he reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Good night, Violet. Good night, Cade. She watched him ride away into the darkness, his form gradually disappearing until all she could hear were the fading hoofbeats. Violet touched her cheek where his fingers had brushed her skin and smiled. Something was beginning here, something precious and unexpected, and she wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew she wanted to find out. Over the next 2 weeks, Cade visited 3 more times. He never stayed long, just an hour or two, but each visit felt important. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams, learning each other's thoughts and fears. Violet found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that surprised her. She'd catch herself listening for hoofbeats, watching the road, her heart leaping every time a rider appeared in the distance. On his 4th visit, Cade brought news. "Cookie wants to double his order. 40 jars a month if you can manage it." Violet's eyes widened. 40. That's $10 a month. Can you do it? "I'll make it work," Violet said firmly. "I'll add more hives, extend my harvesting. Yes, I can do it." "That's what I told him," Cade said with a smile. "I knew you wouldn't let us down." With the additional income from the Coleman Ranch order, Violet made her mortgage payment with 2 days to spare. The relief was overwhelming. She stood in the bank, clutching the receipt that proved the farm was still hers, and felt tears prick her eyes. She'd done it. She'd saved her home, at least for another few months. When she told Cade the news during his next visit, he picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, they were standing close, his hands still on her waist, her palms resting on his chest. The laughter faded, replaced by something deeper and more intense. "Violet," Cade said softly, his gray-blue eyes searching hers, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "These past few weeks, getting to know you, spending time here, it's been the best part of my days. I find myself thinking about you when I'm supposed to be working, wondering what you're doing, if you're smiling, if the bees are behaving. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Violet's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it through his shirt. "I feel the same way. Every time you leave, I count the hours until you might visit again. You've become so important to me so quickly, and it scares me a little, but in a good way." Cade lifted one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her skin. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Violet breathed. His lips met hers softly, tentatively, as if she were something precious that might break. Violet's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into the kiss, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. The kiss deepened, still gentle but with growing passion, and Violet felt like something inside her was blooming, opening to the sun after a long winter. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Cade rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Violet Whitmore. I'm falling in love with you too, Cade Vance." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, and Violet felt a contentment she hadn't known was possible. After so many months of loneliness and struggle, she'd found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he found. As summer turned toward autumn, Cade's visits became more frequent. He started coming twice a week, sometimes 3 times, often bringing small gifts. A book he thought she'd enjoy, wildflowers he'd picked on the ride over, a new tool for her beekeeping that he'd found at the general store. Violet learned the sound of his horse's hoofbeats and could distinguish them from any other riders. She learned how he took his coffee, what made him laugh, what memories brought shadows to his eyes. One evening in late September, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, Cade took her hand. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Violet asked, lacing her fingers through his. "About the future. About what I want my life to look like." He turned to face her. "I love my work at the Coleman Ranch, but it's not what I want forever. I want my own place someday, Land of my own, a house, maybe some cattle. A family, Violet's breath caught. That sounds like a good dream. The thing is, Cade continued, his voice steady but his eyes revealing his nervousness. I can't imagine that future without you in it. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You're strong and smart and kind, and the way you care for your bees, for your land, it shows what kind of person you are. The best kind. Cade, Violet whispered, tears beginning to blur her vision. He slid off the porch chair and knelt before her, pulling a small box from his pocket. I know we haven't known each other that long by some people's standards, but I know my heart. I know what I want. Violet Whitmore, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the dying sunlight. It wasn't elaborate or expensive, but it was honest and real, just like the man offering it. Yes, Violet said, the word coming out half laugh, half sob. Yes, Cade, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply as the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars appeared overhead. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. When? Violet asked. When should we get married? As soon as possible, Cade said. I don't want to wait, unless you want a big wedding with all the trimmings. Violet shook her head. I don't need that, I just need you. Then let's do it next Saturday. We can have the ceremony at the church in Shoshone, just a small gathering. Some of the ranch hands, maybe a few folks from town you're friendly with. That sounds perfect, Violet said. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking excitedly about their future. Cade explained that he'd been saving money for years, and he had enough to buy a small piece of land adjacent to Violet's property that had recently come up for sale. We could combine the farms, he said. Keep your bees, maybe add some cattle, build it up together. I love that idea, Violet said. A partnership in every way. Exactly. The week leading up to the wedding passed in a blur. Violet made arrangements with the minister, a kind older man who'd known her father. She sewed herself a new dress, simple but pretty, in a soft blue fabric she bought at the mercantile. Cade took care of informing the people at the ranch, and Gerald Coleman generously gave him the whole weekend off, a rare luxury for a foreman. On Saturday morning, Violet woke before dawn, too excited to sleep. She dressed carefully, braided her hair and pinned it up and looked at herself in the small mirror. She looked the same as always, but she felt transformed. Today she would become someone's wife, would promise her life and love to Cade Vance, and he would make the same promise to her. The ceremony was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Violet drove her cart into town, Daisy plodding along at her usual steady pace. When she arrived at the small white church, Cade was already waiting outside, looking handsome in a new shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly combed. His face lit up when he saw her. You're beautiful, he said, helping her down from the cart. So are you, Violet replied, making him laugh. About 20 people attended the ceremony, mostly ranch hands from the Coleman outfit and a few townspeople who'd gotten to know Violet through her honey sales. Gerald Coleman himself came, a grizzled man in his 60s with kind eyes and a warm handshake. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Violet and Cade stood before the minister and spoke their vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Cade kissed her sweetly, and the small gathering erupted in applause and good-natured cheering. They had a modest celebration at the hotel dining room, with cake and punch and lots of well wishes. Cookie from the ranch made a speech about how Cade's honey obsession had led him to the best thing that ever happened to him, which made everyone laugh. Gerald Coleman toasted their happiness, and slipped them an envelope that Violet later discovered contained $50, a wedding gift that made her cry. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes and rode together to Violet's farm, now their farm. Cade had brought his few possessions earlier in the week, and they'd already set up the bedroom to accommodate them both. It felt strange and wonderful to have him staying permanently, to know that when she woke in the morning, he'd be there beside her. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Cade held her close and whispered, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy. Thank you for tasting my honey," Violet whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me." He kissed her forehead. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this." "I could never regret you," Violet said. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Violet's life. True to his word, Cade purchased the adjacent property, and they began the work of building their dream together. He was good with his hands, repairing the barn and house, building new bee boxes as Violet expanded her operation. They worked side by side during the days, and in the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked about their plans. Cade proved to be a natural with the bees. He had a calm, patient demeanor that the bees responded to, and soon he was helping Violet with extractions and hive checks. They made a good team, each complementing the other's strengths. When Cade suggested they try raising a small herd of cattle on the new property, Violet agreed, trusting his experience and knowledge. The following spring, in April of 1884, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She told Cade one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction. But his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen, and he lifted her carefully off her feet, spinning her gently. "We're going to have a baby?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "We're going to have a baby," Violet confirmed. "I'm going to be a father," Cade said, and there were tears in his eyes. "I'm going to be a father." They held each other, both crying and laughing, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this new blessing. Cade immediately became protective, insisting Violet rest more and avoid the heavy work around the farm. She protested at first, not wanting to be treated like she was fragile, but eventually they found a balance. Violet continued her beekeeping with Cade's help, but she let him take over the more strenuous tasks. As Violet's belly grew, so did their excitement. They spent evenings in the rocking chair on the porch, Cade's hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move. They debated names, planned the nursery, and dreamed about the future. "You want a boy or a girl?" Violet asked one evening. "I don't care," Cade said honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy and you're both safe, I'll be the happiest man alive." "I feel the same way," Violet said. "Though I think it might be a boy. The way this baby kicks, it feels like a little cowboy already." Cade laughed. "Or a little cowgirl. Don't underestimate your daughters, Mrs. Vance." In late December, as snow began to fall over the Idaho landscape, Violet went into labor. Cade rode to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Martha who delivered half the babies in Shoshone. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly a full day and night, and Cade paced the kitchen floor, terrified and helpless. But finally, just as dawn broke on a clear winter morning, a baby's cry rang through the house. Martha emerged from the bedroom smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Vance, and your wife did beautifully. They're both healthy." Cade rushed into the bedroom to find Violet propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, the happiest tears he'd ever seen. "Meet your son," she whispered. Cade approached carefully as if walking on sacred ground. He looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, and felt his heart expand in a way he'd never imagined possible. He's beautiful. You're both beautiful. Do you want to hold him? Violet asked. With trembling hands, Cade took his son, cradling the feather lightweight against his chest. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny fists curled against his face, and Cade felt a fierce wave of love and protectiveness wash over him. "Hello, little one. I'm your papa. I'm going to take such good care of you and your mama. I promise you that." They named him Thomas after Violet's father, with the middle name of James after Cade's father. Thomas James Vance. He was a good baby, calm and content, and he seemed to love being outside. Violet would strap him to her chest in a sling she made from soft cloth and continue her work with the bees, talking to him about the hives and the flowers and the changing seasons. As Thomas grew, the farm prospered. The cattle herd that Cade had started was growing steadily, and Violet's honey business was more successful than ever. She now supplied not just the Coleman Ranch, but also several stores in neighboring towns, and she'd even started shipping honey to Boise City. The mortgage was no longer a worry, and they even had savings tucked away for emergencies and future investments. When Thomas was 2 years old, Violet became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the fall of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, for the wild roses that grew along Coyote Creek. Rose had her mother's determination and her father's calm patience, and from the moment she could walk, she toddled after her big brother, determined to be part of whatever he was doing. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the farm flourished, and Violet and Cade's love deepened with each passing year. They had their challenges, of course. There were harsh winters that killed some of the cattle, summers when the drought affected the wildflower blooms and the honey production dropped, illnesses and injuries, and the constant hard work that came with farming and ranching. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through the difficult times and celebrating the good. Thomas showed an early interest in the cattle, following his father around and asking endless questions about the animals and the land. Rose was fascinated by the bees, fearless around the hives in a way that both impressed and terrified her parents. Violet taught her carefully, instilling the same respect and patience her own father had taught her. In the spring of 1890, when Thomas was 5 and Rose was 3, Cade surprised Violet with a new project. He'd been secretly working with a carpenter in town to build a proper honey house, larger and better equipped than the small shed Violet had been using. The day he revealed it, leading her out to the new building with her eyes closed, Violet cried with happiness. "It's perfect," she said, walking through the spacious room with its new extraction equipment, shelving for storage, and a large window that let in plenty of natural light. "How did you afford this?" "I've been saving," Cade said. "And Gerald gave me a bonus last year for the work we'd done with the herd. I wanted to do this for you. You've worked so hard and you deserve proper equipment." Violet threw her arms around him. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Cade said. "You and the kids, you're everything to me." That summer, they had the best honey harvest ever, producing over 3,000 pounds. Violet hired 2 women from town to help with the bottling, and they worked long days in the new honey house, laughing and talking as they filled jar after jar with golden sweetness. The children played nearby, and Cade would stop by during breaks from his ranch work, stealing kisses from Violet when the other women weren't looking. In the fall, Gerald Coleman approached Cade with a proposition. He was getting ready to retire and wanted to sell the ranch. He offered Cade first right of refusal at a fair price. It was an incredible opportunity, but it would mean borrowing money from the bank and taking on significant debt. Cade and Violet discussed it long into the night. It was scary to think about such a large loan, but Cade knew ranching inside and out, and they'd proven they could make a success of their own smaller operation. Finally, they decided to take the risk. "We'll do it together," Violet said, "just like everything else. And if anyone can make it work, it's you." They purchased the Coleman Ranch in early 1891, renaming it the Vance Ranch. It was a lot of work managing both the honey operation and the cattle ranch, but they hired good help and managed to keep everything running smoothly. Cade proved to be just as capable an owner as he'd been a foreman, and the ranch continued to prosper under his management. Over the next several years, their family and their businesses continued to grow. In 1893, Violet gave birth to another son, whom they named Samuel. In 1896, their fourth and final child arrived, a daughter they named Clara. The house was full of noise and laughter, busy and chaotic and wonderful. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the cattle and the land. At 16, he could ride as well as any of the ranch hands and had a natural head for the business side of ranching. Rose, at 14, had taken over much of the honey operation, working alongside her mother and showing real talent for the work. The younger children were still finding their passions, but both showed signs of inheriting their parents' strong work ethic. Violet and Cade often sat on their porch in the evenings, watching their children play in the yard, the bee boxes visible in the distance, the cattle grazing on the hills beyond. Sometimes they held hands, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, and sometimes they talked about how far they'd come from that day in the market when a cowboy tasted honey and found so much more than sweetness. "You ever think about that first day?" Violet asked one evening in the summer of 1898 as they celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary. "All the time," Cade admitted. "I think about how close I came to not stopping at your cart. I almost didn't. I was in a hurry to get back to the ranch. But something told me to stop to taste your honey. Best decision I ever made." "I thought you were just being polite," Violet said with a smile. "When you said you'd come visit the farm, I didn't really believe you'd show up." "I couldn't stay away," Cade said. "There was something about you, the way you talked about your bees with such passion, the determination in your eyes when you mentioned saving the farm. I was drawn to you immediately." "I fell in love with you over honey," Violet said softly. "How strange and wonderful is that?" "Not strange at all," Cade said, pulling her close. "That honey was made with love and care, just like everything you do. It showed me who you were before we'd even really talked. And once I got to know you, there was no turning back." "We've built a good life," Violet said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The best life," Cade agreed. "Better than anything I could have imagined." As the years continued to pass, the Vance family became well known and respected throughout the region. The honey was sold as far away as Portland and San Francisco, gaining a reputation for exceptional quality. The ranch was thriving, with several hundred head of cattle and some of the best grazing land in southern Idaho. But more than their business success, Cade and Violet were known for their kindness and integrity. They treated their workers fairly, were active in the community, and raised their children to value hard work and compassion. In 1902, Thomas married a sweet young woman named Emma who worked at the general store in Shoshone. The wedding was a joyful affair, held at the same church where Cade and Violet had exchanged their vows nearly 18 years earlier. Watching their son take his vows, Cade squeezed Violet's hand, both of them remembering their own wedding day and marveling at how quickly time had passed. Thomas and Emma built a small house on the ranch property, and Thomas took over more and more of the daily ranch operations as Cade began to think about slowing down a bit. It felt right. passing the torch to the next generation, knowing the land and the business would be in good hands. Rose never married, choosing instead to pour her energy into expanding the honey business. She was brilliant at it, developing new products like honey-based soaps and creams that sold well in the cities. She traveled occasionally to meet with distributors and store owners, confident and capable, and Violet couldn't have been prouder. Samuel, quieter than his siblings, became a skilled woodworker. He built beautiful furniture that he sold in town, and he helped maintain all the buildings and equipment on the farm. Clara, the youngest, surprised everyone by showing an interest in education. She became a teacher at the Shoshone school, beloved by her students for her patience and creativity. In 1905, on a warm May afternoon, Violet and Cade became grandparents for the first time when Emma gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Jr., and Cade couldn't stop grinning as he held his grandson for the first time. "We're getting old," he joked to Violet. "We're getting blessed," Violet corrected. "Look at everything we have. Our children are happy and healthy doing work they love. We have a grandchild. The farm and ranch are successful, and we still have each other." "You're right," Cade said, wrapping his free arm around her as they both gazed at the sleeping baby. "We're incredibly blessed." More grandchildren followed over the years. By 1910, Thomas and Emma had 3 children, and Rose, despite her earlier assertions about remaining single, fell in love with a banker from Boise named Henry and married him in a small ceremony. They settled in Boise but visited often, and Rose continued to manage the honey business remotely, traveling back and forth between the 2 cities. Cade and Violet grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering with age and sun, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by years of partnership and shared experiences. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands, still looked at each other with the same warmth and affection they'd felt as newlyweds. In 1915, as they approached their 31st wedding anniversary, Violet organized a surprise party for Cade's 53rd birthday. The whole family gathered, along with friends from town and workers from the ranch. There was food and music and laughter, and late in the evening, Cade pulled Violet aside. "Thank you for this," he said. "For all of it. Every day with you has been a gift." "I should be thanking you," Violet said. "You saved me and the farm all those years ago. You gave me a family, a partnership, a love I never dared dream about." "We saved each other," Cade said, "and we built something amazing together." They danced together as the sun set, their children and grandchildren watching with smiles. The music was simple, just someone playing a fiddle, but to Violet and Cade, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. They moved slowly, in perfect harmony, 2 people who'd learned each other's rhythms over 3 decades of marriage. As the evening drew to a close and their guests began to depart, the family gathered one last time. The grandchildren sat at their grandparents' feet, and Thomas proposed a toast. "To Ma and Pa," he said, raising his glass. "You taught us what real love looks like. You showed us that hard work and dedication can build something lasting. You created not just a successful business but a family legacy. Everything we are, everything we have, we owe to you both." "Hear, hear," everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Violet felt tears prick her eyes as she looked around at her family. 4 children, all grown and happy. 7 grandchildren, healthy and loved. A farm and ranch that would continue for generations. And beside her, holding her hand, the man who'd walked into her life 32 years ago and changed everything. "What are you thinking?" Cade asked softly as people began to drift away to their homes. "I'm thinking about honey," Violet said with a smile. Cade laughed. After all these years, you're still thinking about honey. Not just the honey, Violet clarified, but what it represents. How something sweet and golden can come from the hard work of thousands of tiny creatures. How beauty can be made from simple things. How you tasted that honey and found me. How all of this began with something so small and simple. Cade raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. That honey was magic. It led me straight to you. It was good honey, Violet agreed with a grin, but I think it was you who was magic. You saw past the struggling farmer trying to save her land. You saw me. I saw you, Cade confirmed, and I fell completely, hopelessly in love. Best thing I ever did. They sat together on the porch as the last guests departed and the house grew quiet. The stars came out one by one, brilliant against the dark sky, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The bee boxes stood silent in the darkness. The cattle were settled in the pastures, and their family was safe and happy in their homes scattered across the property. What do you think the next 30 years will bring? Violet mused. More of this, Cade said contentedly. More family, more growth, more memories. I want to see our grandchildren grow up, maybe meet some great-grandchildren. I want to watch Thomas turn this ranch into something even bigger than we made it. I want to see what Rose does with the honey business. I want every day I have left to be with you. That sounds perfect, Violet said. Although I have to say, I never imagined my life would turn out like this. That girl at the market with her cart of honey jars, desperately trying to save her farm, she couldn't have dreamed this. But you did save your farm, Cade pointed out. You saved it with your determination and your excellent honey. I just got lucky enough to be there. We got lucky together, Violet said. The timing, the circumstances, all of it. What if you'd come to the market a different day? What if I'd sold all my honey before you arrived? What if you hadn't stopped? I don't like to think about that, Cade admitted. Because I can't imagine my life without you. You're woven into every part of who I am now. And you're woven into me, Violet said. We're like the bees in a hive, you and I, working together, creating something sweet, something lasting. Cade chuckled. Only you would compare our marriage to a beehive. It's a compliment, Violet protested. Bees are amazing. They're loyal, hardworking, and they create something beautiful through cooperation. That's us. Then I'm honored to be in your hive, Mrs. Vance, Cade said, pulling her close. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped in each other's arms until Violet spoke again. Do you remember what you said to me the night you proposed, about wanting land of your own, a house, a family? I do. You got all of it. You made your dream come true. We made our dreams come true, Cade corrected. Together, and it's better than anything I imagined because it's with you. The years that followed continued to be good to them. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management, and by 1920, the Vance Ranch was one of the largest and most respected operations in southern Idaho. The honey business had grown beyond anyone's expectations, with Rose's innovations creating a small empire that employed dozens of people. Cade and Violet slowed down as they aged, but they never truly retired. Cade still rode out to check the cattle sometimes, though not as far or as often as he once had. Violet still tended a few hives herself, though Rose and her employees handled most of the production. They'd earned their rest, but neither could fully step away from the work they loved. In 1922, as they prepared to celebrate their 38th wedding anniversary, their children organized another party. It was smaller this time, just family, but no less meaningful. 14 grandchildren now, ranging in age from infant to 16, and the house was loud and chaotic in the best possible way. After dinner, as the children played in the yard and the adults cleaned up, Thomas pulled his parents aside. Emma and I have been talking, he said, "and we want to officially deed the ranch over to you both, not just in practice but on paper. This is your legacy and it should have your names on it." Violet started to protest, but Thomas held up a hand. "We're not doing this to be nice. We're doing it because it's right. You built this, both of you, from nothing. Pa was just a ranch hand with dreams, and Ma was a struggling farmer with a cart of honey. Look what you created. Look at all of us. This ranch, this family, it all comes from your love and hard work." Cade cleared his throat, visibly moved. "Son, that's one of the kindest things anyone's ever said to me." "It's just the truth," Thomas said, and we all agreed. Rose, Samuel, Clara, all of us. "We want you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done, everything you've sacrificed, everything you've built." The official papers were drawn up, and the ranch was formally registered as belonging to Cade and Violet Vance, with provisions for how it would be divided among the children after they were gone. It felt good, seeing their names on the deed, official recognition of the life they'd built. As summer turned to fall in 1924, Violet began to feel tired more often. At first, she attributed it to age, but when the fatigue persisted and was accompanied by other symptoms, Cade insisted she see the doctor in Boise. The diagnosis was serious but not immediately life-threatening. Her heart was weakening, the doctor said. She needed to rest more, avoid stress, take better care of herself. Violet hated being idle, but she loved Cade too much to disobey his worried requests that she slow down. She spent more time on the porch, watching the world go by, and to her surprise, she found peace in the stillness. She'd worked so hard for so long, maybe it was time to simply be. Cade rarely left her side during this period. He'd retired fully from ranch work, leaving everything in Thomas's capable hands, and devoted himself to caring for Violet. He brought her tea and books, sat with her for hours, held her hand as they watched the sunsets they'd enjoyed together for 40 years. "I'm not ready to lose you," he told her one evening, his voice thick with emotion. "You won't lose me," Violet assured him. "Even when I'm gone, I'll still be here, in the land, in the honey, in our children and grandchildren. We built something that will last forever, Cade. We're in every part of this place." "I know," Cade said, "but I want you here beside me for as long as possible." "I want that too," Violet said, "and I'll fight for every day I have left, but when the time comes, you have to promise me you won't fall apart. You have to keep living, keep being present for our family. They need you." "I promise," Cade said, though the words felt like they were being torn from his chest. "But I reserve the right to miss you terribly." "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," Violet said with a weak smile. To everyone's relief, with rest and proper care, Violet stabilized. She didn't regain her full strength, but she felt better, well enough to resume some of her normal activities. The doctor cautioned that her heart would continue to weaken over time, but with management, she could still have years ahead of her. Those years were precious. Violet and Cade treasured each day, finding joy in simple things. Morning coffee on the porch. Visits from grandchildren who would climb into their laps to hear stories. Watching the bees work in the summer sun. Holding hands in the twilight. In 1929, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. The family threw a grand party with over 100 guests. Violet wore a new dress that Rose had bought her, and Cade wore his best suit. They renewed their vows in the church where they'd been married, and there wasn't a dry eye in the building as they recited the same promises they'd made 4.5 decades earlier. At the reception, as they took the floor for their anniversary dance, Violet looked up at Cade and saw the same love in his eyes that had been there when he'd first kissed her all those years ago. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but to her, He was still the handsome cowboy who'd stopped at her honey cart and changed her life forever. "I'd marry you again in a heartbeat," she whispered as they swayed to the music. "Every day I wake up next to you, I do marry you again in my heart," Cade replied. "Every day I choose you, every day I fall in love with you all over again." "We've had a good run, haven't we?" Violet said. "The best," Cade agreed. "And we're not done yet. I plan on annoying you for at least another decade." Violet laughed, the sound weaker than it once was but no less genuine. "I'm counting on it." The music swelled and they danced, surrounded by their family and friends. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and built an empire of love and honey and hard work. As the song ended and applause filled the room, Cade dipped Violet dramatically, making her laugh and their grandchildren cheer. "Show off," Violet teased as he pulled her back up. "Always have been," Cade said with a grin. "At least where you're concerned." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Violet felt Cade's arm around her waist, steady and strong. And she knew that whatever time they had left, whether it was years or months or days, they would face it together, just as they'd faced everything else. Because that was what love was, she realized. Not just the passionate beginning, though that had been wonderful. Not just the building of a life together, though that had been fulfilling. But also this, the twilight years, when bodies weakened but spirits remained strong. When you looked at your partner and saw not just who they were, but all the years you'd lived together, all the moments shared, all the love accumulated like honey in a jar, sweet and golden and precious. That night as they lay in bed, Cade held her close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Violet asked. "For selling honey at the market that day, for letting me taste it, for saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for every day since then, for giving me this beautiful life." "Thank you for stopping," Violet whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me, for loving me. For being my partner in everything." "Always," Cade promised, "until my last breath and beyond." Violet lived another 7 years, defying her doctor's expectations. She saw 2 more great-grandchildren born. Witnessed Thomas expand the ranch to over 5,000 acres, and watched Rose's Honey Company become one of the most recognizable brands in the western states. She sat on her porch and tended her beloved bees and loved her family with every ounce of her being. When she finally passed away in the spring of 1936, surrounded by family, her last words were to Cade. "Don't forget the honey," she whispered, a reference to their first meeting that made him smile through his tears. "Never," he promised. "I could never forget." Cade mourned deeply but kept his promise not to fall apart. He remained active in his grandchildren's lives, told stories about Violet that kept her memory alive, and took comfort in the legacy they'd built together. Every morning, he'd sit on the porch with his coffee and look out at the bee boxes, the cattle grazing in the distance, the mountains rising beyond, and he'd feel Violet's presence everywhere. He lived for another 5 years, dying peacefully in his sleep in 1941 at the age of 79. His last evening had been spent with his children and grandchildren, sharing memories and laughter. When Thomas checked on him the next morning and found him gone, there was a smile on his face, and on the nightstand beside him was a jar of Violet's honey, one of the last she'd ever made, that he'd kept all these years. They buried him next to Violet on a hillside overlooking the property they'd built together, where they could watch over the land and the family for eternity. At the funeral, Rose told the story of how her parents had met, about the cowboy who'd tasted honey and found love, and there was laughter through the tears. The Vance Ranch and the Whitmore Honey Company continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own contributions, while honoring the foundation that Cade and Violet had laid. The story of their meeting became family legend, told and retold, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places. In the little church in Shoshone, there's a plaque dedicated to their memory, noting their contributions to the community and their enduring love story. And to this day, every spring, someone from the family places a jar of wildflower honey on their graves, a sweet tribute to the love that started with a taste and lasted a lifetime. The bees still work the wildflower meadows north of town, producing honey as golden and pure as it was that day in 1883, when a young woman with determination in her eyes stood behind a cart in the market square. And if you listen carefully on a quiet evening, old-timers say you can still hear the echo of Violet's laughter and Cade's voice calling her name across the Idaho hills. Two souls bound together forever by love and honey and the wild, beautiful West.